It's the second time, if you looked at the material, the worship material, the liturgy, that I've chosen earth-keeping or sustainable living and ecology as a theme for the service. I did so for a number of reasons today. One is to tie in with Tom's presentation about the oceans. But it's also a passion of mine since I can remember. I can still remember when, before I went to school, I think my father asked me, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I didn't know the word ecology then, and it wasn't really a field then, because it's a few years ago. And I just said, I want to be a game ranger, because that has to do, in my mind, I think I was 5 years old or so, with preserving nature. So bear with me, but I think it's also important that we cannot spend enough time as a congregation, as a community, and as individuals on this, which I think is of critical importance, not only for the future of our children and grandchildren, but for us living in these days. The urgency of responsible living has been brought to our attention in many ways. If we look outside, the bulbs are emerging. I checked on my bees. I nourished them through winter. They made it. I was especially concerned about the one hive, a smaller hive that swarmed just before the end of summer, so they didn't have enough time to make honey, and I thought they were going to die. There's not enough honey to sustain them through winter, so I nursed them and they made it. But now I observe the bees are coming out with this warm weather. They're very active, but there's nothing to eat for them. So they're using the little bit of reserves that they have in the hive by being more active. And yesterday, or Friday, I opened the hives again and did my inspection as far as I could. And the big hive with enough reserves, I think, is okay. And the other one, I had the bees were just sitting there, raising their bodies to indicate they're aware of my presence, but not really doing much more. And I put down some food for them, and yesterday I looked again, and they seemed to be regenerated. So, in many ways, the urgency of responsible living is being brought to our attention, and it will increasingly be so. The passage we listen to is one of the creation narratives that we have in our sacred text in the book of Genesis. It is the oldest one of the two, and it's older than the one that we find in the first chapter of Genesis. And it has a slightly different take, and also a different order of creation, different things that were created. So, just a footnote, if you insist on the literal truth of every word in the Bible, then you have a problem, because two different stories cannot both be literally true. You have to pick one or the other, or you have to follow what I think is a more sensible approach, not to be fundamentalistic and literalist about it, and say, all right, these stories are both true. They address different aspects, and the truth lies more in the mythology than in the perceived factual historical truth that they're trying to convey. We read here of humanity emerging from the earth. And in America, we call it dirt, which has always riled me, because it's not dirty, it's the soil, it's what sustains us, it's the basis of life. But we come from the earth, we return to the earth. I said that yesterday at the internment service that I had to do. Again, we come from the earth, we return there as well. We find an interesting combination of words here. Positioning humanity as part of what we are embedded in, what is around us. I think a very realistic, but also a humbling positioning of humanity coming from the earth. And we can continue to call it dirt if we want to, but that typifies ourselves. A pronouncement of how we see ourselves coming from dirt. I would say coming from soil, a life-giving perception rather. But coming from the soil and then assigning humanity a huge responsibility here in this narrative, in this creation narrative, of the tilling of the earth and protecting the earth. A very interesting combination, I think, an acknowledgement and a task being given, a twofold task to humanity. You are dependent on the earth. Work it, till it. But do it in such a way that you combine protecting it with that tilling of the earth. I think, and I want to return to the sermon title now, between $27.63 and around $1 million. It has to do with the perspective on humanity and our position in creation. If you take a view, somewhat of a capitalist view, but I don't want to say that system is per definition evil, but if you look at a human body and what it is worth, if you break it down to the base elements that you find in the periodic table, depending on market conditions and on the point of sale, the basic elements would be $27.63. That's the one figure, when I checked, that came up from Professor Google. The other one was around $162, because that market was in a different country and it picked different elements that they want to put up for sale. So $27, give and take a few cents, up to $162. If you just take a human body and you break it down to base elements, if you look at it from selling, breaking it down into organs and tissue, then you can get over $1 million for one human body. Naturally, given that you keep the organs alive and so forth. Again, here also depending on the nation where it is sourced and also where it is sold. Over $1 million, different parts of the body. So it depends very much on how you view it, from which perspective you look at it. This body of ours, how much is it worth? You have the very base approach, right, just elements, this is what it's worth. The organs, this is what it's worth. Taking that perspective and saying, all right, let's look at our perspective on how we see humanity and our relationship with the earth. If we look at our mythology, which is also reflected to an extent at least in some of our sacred texts, humanity is viewed quite often as having the task to conquer the earth. We have to subdue the earth, and it is projected as an heroic effort. We have to conquer nature and make it livable. We have a name for it, we call it civilization as well. When you take nature and you make it into a place that, according to the prevailing philosophy, you make it a more habitable space for our species, for humanity. The hero in our mythology, at least as a Western culture, is also very firmly tied to this image of the conquering individual. And in the American psyche, this is very strong. You know, going out west, as if we're the first ones to arrive there, the palefaces. Conquering new territories, making it possible for us to go there and to live there. Perhaps the first task for us as Christians, and a very important task, I think, is a revision of our basic mythology. And using science and the evidence that we have obtained in abundance to review which basic narrative we take from the scriptures as the one that will direct us for the living of every day and into the future. Making science and the evidence that we have our partner for responsible choices and living. Not, in my opinion, taking the conquering one that subdues nature, but taking this image of living a symbiotic existence, acknowledging that we are part of the system, the ecological environment, that we do not, even if we want to, we cannot stand separate from it. We come from the earth, that is who we are. We are firmly embedded by this, we are sustained by it. And to continue, in my perspective, with the fallacy of conquering nature is a fallacy that will be very expensive and that will lead to our extinction as a species. It's that simple. I've observed in Florida several hurricane seasons where the beach gets washed away. And all those beautiful, expensive homes that like their little bit of beach in front of them, in the first 2 years, you had endless lines of trucks, dump trucks, bringing sand in. For months, dumping sand. Second hurricane season we were there, the more active one, about 8 feet deep of beach was removed again and dumped about 500 yards into the ocean. The dump trucks were fired up again for months. And the third hurricane season, no more trucks. No more insurance either for the homes on the beachfront, because they were not supposed to be built there in the first place. And perhaps this coronavirus is another illustration that no matter what or how we think we are superior and how we can conquer nature and subdue it, we don't have enough tricks in our bag. not by any way. So therefore, let us take heed and make this narrative our preferred creation story. An acknowledgement we are from the earth. We are part of this system. And due to our ability of reason, let us be reasonable people and reasoned people. And make science one of the things that will guide us in making responsible and moral decisions about the way that we are in the world. No matter what we do, and we discussed this at the One Bible Study group this past week, because we're reading or doing a Bible study with a devotional that is called For the Beauty of the Earth, that focuses on ecology. We can acknowledge that we're part of these complex systems. Natural systems, and then the systems we developed as a civilization to exist in this ecosystem. But I think we have to be wise and acknowledge that our response to the environment was not guided by, let us live in a symbiotic relationship, but the driving motive for it, to a large extent, was the market economy. Our systems were not designed to say, let's live in reciprocity with nature. It was designed to say, let us maximize profit. And often short-term profit. And I'm not condemning that again. It is just an acknowledgement. This was to a large extent the driver of much of what we see around us, to make money. So, if you want to formulate in these complex systems a responsible ecological response, it's not going to be easy, it's complex. Every time that I take out our little bag of garbage for the week, it's so light. I put it in a plastic bag because I don't know how else to do it. And it's plastic that I put in the plastic bag, that's all. It's just plastic. The rest of the stuff we get rid of in other ways, ecological, responsible ways. But I don't know what to do with the plastic. And I've thought about it every way, and I don't have time to analyze it sufficiently. But it's not easy to cut plastic out of your garbage disposal. Another example, coffee hour. We've kicked this around for a long time. Do we wash cups or do we use disposable containers? And there's so much going into this. Once you start really thinking about it, I run out of time and I run out of gray matter to figure it out. For instance, firing up, turning on the dishwasher. It uses a lot of energy, it uses a lot of water. That energy is generated not necessarily in a green way. So, is it more ecologically responsible to say, all right, let's just throw away the stuff into the garbage, disposable containers, or let us use all this energy to wash a few cups? It's also from a sociological perspective difficult to get people to do coffee hour if you have to spend another hour washing cups. That's a reality that we also have to factor into our thinking. And I'm mentioning this just to say, all right, Our systems were not designed to make things easy in ecologically responsible way. But I think Lent is a good time for us to start rethinking our relationships with our scriptures and what base narratives do we accept as the one that grounds us and will guide us. I think it's a good time, Lent, for a vision, as I've said, of our most important mythological motives. Either the conquering hero or the wise individual and community, acknowledging that we are Adama, coming from the earth. And let us as a community acknowledge the difficulty of living responsibly in ecological way. And let us, while we continue to acknowledge the good that can be present and that is, at least in some ways, present in a market economy, and see how we can be wise and how we can lead and be a light to find a better way of doing things. Above all, let us continue as God's people, as we are called here to till the earth and to protect it, to take care of it. Let us also do that as a community towards one another, and to the extent that it's possible for us, in a compassionate way, in our being in the world. And whatever we do, let us not define ourselves only in dollars and cents, because then $27.63 will be a very high price for where we'll end up. May God lead us through God's Spirit to be God's people, taking care of our earth and also of one another. Amen.